The auctioneer barely looked up when he said my number. Lot 63. Abandoned structure, Summit County. Remote location, no utilities, no road access, sold as is with 0 warranty. We start at $5. Silence. Not the kind of silence that means people are thinking about it. The kind that means nobody's even pretending to care. $2, he said, dropping his voice like he was embarrassed for the property itself. I raised my hand. Not because I had a plan. Not because I knew what I was doing. I raised it because I had exactly $47 left to my name, a duffel bag in a bus station locker, and winter coming to Colorado whether I was ready for it or not. The gavel came down. Sold. Just like that, I owned a building. At 18 years old, 2 months out of foster care, I became a property owner for the price of a gas station coffee and a candy bar. The other bidders, mostly contractors and land flippers, looked at me the way you look at someone who just made a mistake they'll regret by morning. One guy shook his head slowly and muttered something to his buddy that I couldn't hear but could definitely feel. I didn't care. I had nothing. Which meant I also had nothing to lose. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known. Standing in that rundown county building with a receipt in my hand and no idea what I'd just bought, was that the place I'd just purchased for $2 had been waiting for me. Not metaphorically. Literally. Waiting. My name is Joanna Tate. And I aged out of the Colorado foster system on a Tuesday in September with a garbage bag full of my belongings and a social worker's handshake that lasted exactly 3 seconds. Good luck, Joanna. That was it. 18 years summarized in 2 words and a forced smile. I'd been in the system since I was 6. My mother died when I was 5, cancer, fast and brutal, and my father had never been in the picture. No family came forward. No distant aunts, no cousins who remembered I existed. I became a ward of the state, which is a formal way of saying I became nobody's responsibility and everybody's problem. I moved through 7 different homes in 12 years. Some were fine. Some were not. I learned early that the trick to surviving foster care wasn't making people love you, it was making sure they didn't notice you enough to get rid of you. I kept my head down, my grades decent, and my expectations at absolute 0. By 16, I was working part-time at a grocery store, saving what I could in an account the state couldn't touch. By 17, I knew exactly what was coming when I turned 18, nothing. No safety net. No backup plan. Just the edge of the cliff and the expectation that I'd figure out how to fly on the way down. I tried. I really did. I applied for every scholarship I could find, but my grades were good, not great. I looked into trade programs, but most required fees I couldn't pay up front. I asked my last foster parents, decent people, overwhelmed by their own 3 kids, if I could stay a few extra months while I got on my feet. They said no. Not cruelly, just no. There wasn't room. There wasn't time. There wasn't obligation. So I left. I stayed with a friend from school for 2 weeks until her parents made it clear I needed to go. I stayed at a shelter for another week until a bed opened up somewhere else and mine got reassigned. I worked every shift I could get, but minimum wage in a tourist town doesn't cover first, last, and deposit on an apartment. It doesn't even come close. By late October, I was sleeping in the break room at work, sneaking in after close, leaving before the morning crew. My manager found out and didn't fire me, but she made it clear I couldn't keep doing it. Liability, she said. I understood. I always understood. That's when I saw the flyer. Public auction. County seized properties. Parcels, vehicles, structures. Cash only. I went because it was warm inside and I had 2 hours before my shift. I sat in the back and watched people bid on things with the casual confidence of people who had margins for error. I wasn't planning to bid on anything. But when that cabin came up, lot 63, no road access, sold as is, something in me just moved. $2. I had $2. And nothing left to lose. The clerk handed me the deed like she was passing me a receipt for a broken toaster. "You'll need to contact the county surveyor if you want the exact coordinates," she said, not making eye contact. "Property's about 19 miles northeast of Bailey. There's no address. No utilities hookup. It's extremely remote. How do I get there?" She blinked at me like the question surprised her. "I honestly don't know. Forest Service Road, maybe? You'd have to ask someone who knows the area." I took the deed, folded it carefully, and put it in my jacket pocket. I had no car. No GPS. No idea what I was doing. But I had a place. It took me 3 days to figure out how to get there. I asked around at the grocery store, older guys who hunted, people who'd lived in the county their whole lives. Most of them had never heard of the property, but one guy, a regular named Frank who bought the same six-pack every Thursday, stopped and actually thought about it. "Remote cabin northeast of Bailey," he repeated. "No road access, wait. You talking about the old Faro place?" "I don't know. Maybe." He scratched his jaw. "There's an old structure up near the Pass Creek area. Been abandoned for decades. Used to be some story about it, Outlaw Hideout, something like that. Nobody goes up there. No reason to. Can you tell me how to find it?" He looked at me for a long time, like he was deciding whether I was serious. "You got a vehicle?" "No." "Then you're gonna have a hell of a time, kid." But he drew me a map anyway. On a napkin. In ballpoint pen. I took a bus as far as Bailey, then hitched a ride with a guy hauling firewood who got me another 6 miles up a Forest Service road before he turned off. I walked the rest. For miles through scrub pine and high-altitude cold, following Frank's napkin and the coordinates I'd written down from the county's online parcel map. It took me 5 hours. And when I finally found it, I understood why it sold for $2. The cabin was half collapsed. Not metaphorically. Literally half of the roof had caved in on the left side, timbers jutting out like broken ribs. The walls were rough-cut logs, grey with age and rot, gaps wide enough to see straight through. The windows were gone, just black squares where glass used to be. The door hung crooked on one hinge, wedged half open like a mouth stuck mid-sentence. It sat in a clearing surrounded by pine and aspen, the forest pressing in close like it was trying to reclaim what had been taken. There was no driveway. No mailbox. No neighbor within sight or sound. Just this. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Because it was mine. Broken, rotting, unlivable, mine. I walked up to the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The interior smelled like wet wood and thyme. It was a single room, maybe 12 by 14 feet. The collapsed section of roof let in a jagged rectangle of sky. Leaves had blown in and piled in the corners. The floor was wide plankwood, warped and stained but mostly intact. A stone fireplace occupied the far wall, cracked, but structurally still there. No furniture. No trash. Just space and cold air and the sound of wind moving through gaps in the logs. I set my duffel bag down and stood in the center of the room, turning slowly. This was it. This was what $2 bought. I should have been devastated. I should have walked back down the mountain and figured out another plan. But I didn't. I stayed. I spent the first hour clearing debris, dragging out broken branches, sweeping leaves with my hands, piling them outside. I found a top in an old shed behind the cabin, half rotted but usable, and used it to cover the open section of roof, weighing it down with rocks. It wasn't perfect, but it kept the wind out. I built a fire in the fireplace using pine needles and deadwood from the forest. It took 6 tries and all my gas station lighter fluid, but eventually it caught. The warmth was immediate and shocking. I sat in front of it and cried for the first time in months. Not sad crying. Just release. I had a roof. A fire. A door I could close. I had a place. That night, I slept on the floor in my sleeping bag, as close to the fire as I could get without burning myself. The altitude cold seeped through the gaps in the walls, but the fire held, and I fed it every time I woke up, which was often. I dreamed about my mother. Not a memory, just her presence. She was standing in the doorway of the cabin, watching me, and in the dream I wasn't scared. I felt safe. When I woke up, the fire was embers and the sun was just starting to rise through the trees, turning everything pale blue and gold. I got up, stepped outside, and looked around. The forest was vast. Silent except for birds and wind. I could see mountains in the distance, their peaks dusted with early snow. There were no power lines. No roads. No signs of another human being. I was completely alone. And for the first time in my life, that didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like privacy. I spent the next week making the cabin livable. I patched the roof as best I could with scavenged wood and the torp. I stuffed gaps in the walls with moss and mud. It wasn't insulation, but it cut the wind. I cleared the chimney and reinforced the fireplace stones. I walked down to the nearest creek, a mile east, and hauled water back in old bottles I'd collected from the roadside. It was hard work. Exhausting. My hands blistered and bled. I lost weight I didn't have to lose. But it was mine. I started noticing things about the cabin. Small things. Intentional things. The logs were hand-hewn. Someone had built this with an axe, not a saw. The fireplace was expertly made. The stones fitted so precisely that even after decades, it didn't leak smoke. There were marks carved into some of the beams, initials, dates, symbols I didn't recognize. On the back wall, near the floor, I found a name scratched into the wood, Ian Farrow, 1881. Frank had been right. This was old. Older than I'd realized. One afternoon, while sweeping the floor near the fireplace, I noticed something odd. One of the planks sounded different when I stepped on it. Hollow. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the edges. The plank was loose, deliberately loose. It wasn't nailed down like the others. I pried it up carefully, and beneath it, set into the dirt foundation, was a metal box. It was small, rusted, and locked with a simple latch that broke when I pulled on it. Inside, a leather journal, brittle with age. A stack of old letters tied with string. A small cloth bag that rattled when I shook it. And a photograph. I pulled the photograph out first. It was black and white, faded, but clear enough. A woman, maybe in her 30s, standing in front of this cabin, before it had collapsed, when it still had glass in the windows and a full roof. She wore a plain dress and a serious expression, her hair pulled back tight. Behind her, partially visible, was a man on horseback. I flipped it over. On the back, in careful handwriting, Evangeline Farrow, 1898. The year I stopped running. My hands were shaking. I opened the journal. The first entry was dated March 1881. My father was a thief, and I am his inheritance. I sat on the floor and read the entire journal in one sitting, my back against the stone fireplace, the afternoon light fading around me. Evangeline Farrow had been the daughter of Elias Farrow, a known outlaw in Colorado Territory in the 1870s. He'd been part of a gang that robbed stages and supplied trains through the mountain passes. Not famous, not Jesse James or Butch Cassidy, but known enough to be wanted. Known enough to be hunted. Evangeline had grown up in that world. Moving camp to camp. Never staying anywhere long. Learning to shoot, to ride, to disappear. When she was 16, her father was killed in a shootout with a marshal's posse outside of Leadville. The rest of the gang scattered. Evangeline ran. She wrote about it with a precision that made my chest hurt. I took what I could carry and rode until the horse collapsed. I walked the rest. I did not know where I was going, only that I could not go back. She'd found this place by accident. A high clearing, far from roads or towns, hidden by forest. She'd built the cabin herself, slowly, over months, with hand tools and stolen lumber. She'd lived alone for years. Hunting. Trapping. Trading furs in distant towns where nobody knew her name. The journal spanned 17 years. In that time, she'd built a life. A quiet one. A hidden one. She wrote about loneliness. About fear. About the constant worry that someone would find her, recognize her, connect her to her father's crimes. But she also wrote about freedom. I have nothing here. No law. No judge. No man to tell me what I'm worth. I have the forest and the sky and my own hands. It is enough. She never married. Never had children. She lived in this cabin until 1898, and then the entries stopped. The last one was short, I am 43 years old. I have lived more years free than I did running. If someone finds this someday, I hope they understand, what looks like nothing to the world can be everything to the person who needs it. I set the journal down and sat in the silence. She had been 18 when she ran. The same age I was now. She had nothing. She built a life anyway. I opened the small cloth bag. Inside were coins. Old coins. Gold and silver, tarnished but real. Maybe 24 of them. I stared at them for a long time, my heart pounding. This wasn't treasure. Not in the way people imagine treasure. But it was something. It was her insurance. Her emergency. The thing she'd hidden in case she ever needed to run again. And she'd left it here. For no one. Or for someone like me. I took the coins to a dealer in Denver 3 weeks later. I hitched rides, took buses, walked when I had to. The dealer was skeptical until he examined them. Then his face changed. These are authentic, he said quietly. Late 1800s. Where did you get them? Inheritance, I said. He didn't push. He offered me $9,200. I took it. With that money, I bought materials. Proper roofing. Insulation. A wood stove. Solar panels and a battery system. I hired a guy with a truck to haul it all up the Forest Service road as far as he could, then I hauled the rest myself, load by load, over 2 weeks. I taught myself to build by watching videos on a phone I charged at the library in Bailey. I made mistakes. I wasted materials. I broke things and had to start over. But I learned. By December, the cabin had a full roof. The walls were sealed. The wood stove worked. I had light at night and heat when I needed it. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. I started trapping that winter, small game, ethical kills, and selling pelts the way Evangeline had. I foraged. I learned the forest. I walked the ridgelines and found peace in the silence. In the spring, I got my GED. I applied for a remote data entry job and got it, enough income to cover food and the few supplies I couldn't make or find. I stayed. People thought I was crazy. The few who knew about me, anyway. But I wasn't crazy. I was free. I planted a garden in the clearing using seeds I saved from town. I built a small addition onto the cabin, a workshop, like Evangeline's old shed. I started writing my own journal. And every night, I sat by the fire and thought about the girl who'd built this place with her own hands, who'd lived here alone and unafraid. Who'd left behind a legacy not of fame or fortune but of survival. She'd made it. So could I. I still live in that cabin. It's been 3 years now, and I'm 21. The place doesn't look like it did when I found it. The roof is solid. The walls are tight. There's a garden, a workshop, a small greenhouse I built last summer. I'm not rich. I'm not famous. But I'm not homeless. I own something. Not just property, my life. I think about Evangeline Farrow often. I think about the fact that she left those coins hidden under the floor, not because she didn't need them, but because maybe, somewhere in her, she believed someone else would. Someone like her. Someone like me. The world told me I was disposable. That aging out of the system meant I'd failed before I started. That $2 couldn't buy anything worth having. But $2 bought me a chance. And I built the rest myself. If you're reading this and you feel like you're standing at the edge with nothing beneath you, know this, sometimes the fall is actually the beginning. Sometimes what looks like the end of everything is just the start of something no one else could have imagined for you. You don't need much to start. Just enough to take the first step. And the courage to keep building.